Welcome to the Crystal Starnes Show with your host, Crystal Starnes. Today, we have a special guest that's coming on the show. His name is Reagan, and Dan is a five-time Emmy Award-winning sports television director for 40 plus years who still does freelance sports television directing. He also has a passion in classic rock songs, and he wrote a book. So let's welcome Dan Reagan to the show. Welcome, Dan. How are you?
I'm great, Crystal. Thanks for having me. It's really good to see you and be here on your show.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy you're on the show. I can't wait to hear about your book that you wrote. So I guess we could start off with telling the audience a little bit about who you are and your background.
So as you said, I was in sports. I was a sports television director. I was in sports TV for 40 years. About 35 of those, I was director. I started out in New York, where I cut my teeth, as they say, for 12 years. I worked on New York Mets games, New York Yankees games, Islanders games, what was then the New Jersey Nets before they moved to Brooklyn. Also did some soccer, but predominantly I did baseball and hockey. And then in 1993, I got a chance to move to Atlanta with my wife and my then young son and go to work for Turner Sports, where I directed the Atlanta Braves games for 9 years. I did the NBA on TNT for 6 years. And then Atlanta got a hockey team in those last 3 years, and I directed the Atlanta Thrashers. They're no longer with us, unfortunately. After 9 years at Turner, I went to ESPN, and I spent 18 years at ESPN, where I was predominantly doing college sports, but I also did baseball, Major League Baseball there. And I also did hockey for NBC, and I've done some college sports for CBS Sports, and I directed the Baltimore Ravens preseason games for 6 years. So that's my background in sports television.
Wow, that's impressive. That's a lot. You've had a lot of experience over the years. You're like a role model.
Well, thank you. It was a very fun career. Had a lot of great times, a lot of great memories. Got to work with a lot of really interesting people, cover a lot of really interesting teams, great players. For the 9 years I was at Turner Sports, I told people that I got paid to watch Greg Maddux pitch and Michael Jordan play basketball. So that was pretty fun.
Wow. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we'll talk a little bit about what your passion is. Something totally different than what you did as a career. So what inspired you to get involved with the classic rock songs? I mean, obviously you love the music.
Right. I grew up as a child of the 60s, and I had 4 older siblings. And that's where I was really introduced to their music, the Beatles and Chicago, and all the groups that came out in the mid to late 60s, the Beach Boys and the Rascals and all of those groups. And I just immediately it's interesting because I never really played an instrument, but I really was around the music a lot. My siblings played the music. And music kind of captured my heart. And as I got into my teenage years, that love for rock and roll music and classic pop and folk music, it grew and grew and grew. And I was the guy that when albums started coming out and they started putting liner notes on in the with the record, I was the one that would read them top to bottom, and I wanted to know who wrote the songs, who produced the songs. I had this yearning to know, what is this song all about? So that then developed. It grew and grew, and I went to college, and I thought I was going to be a radio announcer, a sports radio announcer. And I did go to went to CW Post on Long Island, and I worked at my college radio station for 4 years, mostly sports, but I did do some music. And there was an event in December of 1980 that really impacted my life in a great way. And that was when John Lennon was murdered. That's one of those events where you always remember where you were when it happened. And I was in my dorm room that night playing cards and watching Monday Night Football when it was announced. And a couple of months after that happened, John Lennon was my favorite Beatle. Thus, he was my favorite musician. And a couple of months after that happened, Playboy released a series of interviews they did with him. And one was just a typical Playboy Q&A. And the second one was they asked John Lennon to describe what all the Beatles songs were about. And that was just a gold mine for me. I bought that issue and I was like enthralled because here was John Lennon describing what in my mind, the greatest rock and roll group of all time. He was telling us all this is what all these songs are about. And all 99% of them or 95% of them are dubbed Lennon and McCartney. And because he and Paul McCartney had that, partnership. But he was very frank and very open and honest to say that was mainly Paul's song. I, helped out with the middle eights or whatever. But that John Lennon doing that, I remember saying to myself, why can't everybody do this? So, I kept it, saved it. And then you fast forward about 13, 14 years. And my wife and I are really big fans of Steely Dan. We love Steely Dan. And they never were a touring band. And then in 1994, they decided that Donald Fagen and Walter Becker were going to come out and they were going to get a group of musicians together and they were going to tour. And we were in Los Angeles. I was there with the Braves and I had a dark day. And as luck would have it, I got tickets for Steely Dan. My wife and I went and it was wonderful. A couple of weeks later, they came to Atlanta. We decided to go again. And when that concert was over, we got in the car. And my wife said to me, weren't they great? And I said, yeah, they really were. And she said, don't you wish there was a book that described what all their songs were about? And I said, yes, I do. And under my breath, I said, I'm going to write it. And I guess between the John Lennon thing happening and then at the same time, roughly around that same time that Steely Dan came out, a man that I worked with at Turner Sports and shared an office with, I walked into the office one day. This is like 1993 or so, early 94. He had a stack of papers on his desk about this high. And I asked him, what's that stack of paper on your desk? And he said, oh, that's a manuscript to a book I'm writing. And I said, really? What's it about? And he told me it was a book about the Civil War. And it was about the bloodiest battle of the Civil War, the Battle of Antietam. And he started, going into great detail about this passion he had for the Civil War. And that stuck with me. And I said to myself, Richard Kroger can write a book about his passion about the Civil War. Why can't I? And I filed it away. One thing led to another, Steely Dan concert and all. And then that night after the concert, when we got home, I went down to the basement, dug out the old Playboy with Lennon describing the Beatles songs. I started reading it. And my wife comes in the room, looks at me and says, what are you doing? And I said, honestly, honey, I'm reading the articles. And I looked at her and I said, you're not going to believe this, but I've been thinking for a while that I really would like to write a book about rock and roll songs and the meaning behind the songs. I want to try and interview as many people as I can and get them to tell me what their songs are about. And so I started right around in that time period in late 1994. And I did it for about 4 straight years. And I got about 35 interviews done. But at that time, I was traveling a lot, working a lot with Turner Sports. My wife came down with an illness. Thankfully, she was okay. But our two sons were very young. So, and plus I was getting a lot of resistance from the managers of the rock artists that I wanted to speak with. Call us back in 6 months. He's in the studio recording an album. 6 months would go by, I'd call back. He's going out on tour to promote the record. All of it was true, but one after the other. It was between, no, he's not interested, or no, not right now, call us back, or no, not right now, the timing isn't good. All of that came together and I was like, I'm going to put this aside. And I put it aside for a long time. And when I say a long time, Crystal, I put it down in 1998 and I didn't pick it back up until 2012. And throughout that whole period, I had a whole group of friends who knew I was doing this, who knew that I had started it, and they were intrigued by it. And they'd ask me, what's going on with your book? How's your book going? I'm like, nah, and they go, you got to do it. You got to do it. And so throughout that period of time, I picked it up, put it down again, picked it up, put it down again. And then finally in 2020, when the pandemic hit, I had no more excuses. And so I'm probably the only person on planet Earth that will tell you that COVID was a blessing, because it shut everything down, including sports. I couldn't do my job, but it also meant that all of the artists couldn't go out on the road. And so that was a boondoggle for me. And I was able to, what I thought was going to be a book turned into 2 volumes because I had so many more interviews.
That's amazing. I just think it's so impressive that you did that. And the books are really thick. Because I have, obviously I have a copy of them, and they're just yeah, you worked really hard with that.
Yeah, the books are thick because I went to, self-publish them. I had kicked around the idea of going the traditional publishing route. And I had arguments on both sides telling me, I spoke with one woman who's a marketing person, and she was like begging me to let her, take it and market it. And I said to her, suppose I give you this and you go and find a traditional publishing house, what are we looking at? And she said, well, it'd be at least 9 to 12 months. And I'm like, no. I'm at this point, this was in early 2021. And we're now looking at, I've been doing this since it's starting for like 27 years. And I'm like, this book needs to get out now. Plus, the other thing was, and the reason why, as you mentioned, it's thick. If I were to go with a traditional publisher, I would have given up my rights to the book. And that would have given the publisher the right to edit the book as they saw fit. And I didn't want to do that because there are a lot of really long kind of stories about certain songs in the book that if I left it to somebody else who isn't as interested and passionate about it as I am, they might have edited out chunks of something that like Jackson Browne or Billy Joel had to say that were really truly pertinent to what they were trying to get across. So I went the self-publishing route, and it was released last March 18th, my wife's birthday. And here we are.
That's awesome. Well, what was one of the things that surprised you throughout the process?
I would say there were several things that surprised me. One was I kind of went into it with a preconceived notion that songwriters attacked their craft by getting the lyrics first and then putting lyrics on top of music. I don't know why I thought that, but that was what I thought how people went about songwriting. And I found that it was just the opposite, that almost to a person, the music came first and then the lyrics. So that was a bit of an eye opener. What else surprised me was how difficult most of the artists said writing lyrics was. Billy Joel equated it to childbirth. He said that, the music is the easy part because they're all musicians and they all can come up with melodies and riffs, but then trying to find the right words to put on it was really, really difficult. Until I came across Al Stewart, who wrote Year of the Cat and Time Passages on the Border. And then Al Stewart was a really big surprise because it was a piece of cake writing lyrics for him. In fact, for Al Stewart's album Year of the Cat, and for that song, he had 4 sets of lyrics. I was like, do you have any idea how unusual you are with that? And he said, yes, I do know. And the last thing that surprised me was, again, you go in with kind of preconceived notions about who a rock star is and what they do and what their backgrounds are. I never expected when I went down that road that I would run into an MIT graduate, but I did, in Tom Scholes of Boston. He was an MIT grad and just a real regular guy, a great guy, really interesting guy. But I didn't think that when I started out writing a book about rock and roll that I was going to meet a guy that went to MIT. And that's not a knock on people in rock and roll. It's just, it was a surprise.
Wow. Well, did you ever get any feedback, like anyone that bought your book? Did anyone like mention anything?
Yeah, that has been some of the most gratifying things, is that I have gotten some really very positive feedback. And the feedback that has touched me most is that several people have come to me and said, now that I've read, about Billy Joel or whatever, the Guess Who, Chicago, now I want to go listen to those songs. And that was really the hook for me, is that as I went along through this process and I was telling people a little bit about what I was doing, they would say to me, who'd you speak to? And I would tell them, and I'd tell them a story about like Taking Care of Business by BTO. And they'd go, wow, it's a really cool story. Now that makes me want to go listen to it. And so several people have told me that while they were reading it, they put the music of the artist that they were reading about on so that they could listen to the song while they read it. So that was very, very gratifying. And the other thing that was really gratifying and has been gratifying is the number of people that have come back and bought 3 or 4 more sets after they've read it and said, I know this guy, my brother-in-law, my uncle, everybody, and they bought additional copies. So that's, the best gratification that any author could get is, or anybody. I mean, if you're in a restaurant, if people come to your restaurant for the first time, then they come back and they eat the food again, that means they liked it, right? So when people buy the book and they like it and they read it and then they want to buy more copies, and that's happened, many times. So that's really been very rewarding.
Yeah. I was just thinking to myself right now, I might buy a copy from my dad, because I think he would be interested in it too,
No, that'd be great. And I'd be happy to sign it.
Okay, awesome. So what kind of feedback can you give to all the future authors out there, anyone that wants to write a book, whether it's in their field that they work in, or if it's just something they do as a hobby?
So what I would tell people that think they have a book in them, and I know people like that. I know a man that I worked with in New York, and he and I were partners in sports TV for many years, and he's always wanted to write the novel, and he hasn't yet. And now that I have, I'm encouraging him to do it. Classic Rock Songs Revealed is a testament to perseverance, because as I just said to you, I had what I thought was a pretty good idea in the 90s. I put it down, and there were many, many moments of doubt. Many times I said to myself, what are you doing? So many people are saying no, so many doors are closing, but yet one door would open and that would give me encouragement. And if I would say to anybody that wants to write a book or do anything in life, don't ever tell yourself you can't do it. Don't ever believe that you can't get something done. The late, great college basketball coach, Jim Valvano, who left us way, way, way too early, and ESPN has done a whole campaign with the V Foundation. And there's a very, very memorable clip that he did. He gave a speech at the ESPY Awards just weeks before he died, where he said, don't give up, don't ever give up. And I think that's great advice, whether you're an aspiring author or whatever line of work or whatever profession you're in. Don't ever give up on your dreams, because you can reach them, you can attain them. Because I'm living proof, 28 years from start to publication. So I hope that people will take that message away from Classic Rock Songs Revealed, is that this guy had a dream, he had a vision. Took him a while to get from point A to point B, but he got there.
Yes, you did. And you are an inspiration, because people do give up. You're welcome. So where can everyone find your book, and where can they order it from?
So they can get my book at my website, classicrocksongsrevealed.com. And it's also available for people that like to read Kindle. It's also available on Amazon. You can buy these books also on Amazon, but I would prefer you get them from me, from my website, classicrocksongsrevealed.com. I get them out very, very quickly. And as I said, many people have asked for me to inscribe them, and I do. And there's probably nothing I enjoy more than inscribing books to people, because they're my babies. They're my twins, as I call them. So classicrocksongsrevealed.com. And people can also follow me on Facebook at classicrocksongsrevealed.com. I put out little notices and little blurbs and little this dates and rock and roll histories, probably 4 times, 5 times a week. And the response to that has been pretty, has been fairly good, depending upon what the subject matter is.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really enjoyed talking to you and meeting you finally in person.
The pleasure's been mine. It's been great to finally meet you after all the communications we had. I appreciate the time you've given me, and I wish you the best of luck with your shows going forward.
Thank you. And thank you everyone out there for tuning in today. Until next time, I hope everyone has a fabulous week. Take care, everyone.